Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. Just when the long-running saga of teachers' pay seemed to be settled, the unions have pulled the plug. We'll hear how the standoff relates to work conditions rather than pay specifically, and how the politicians hope to resolve the issue. Also in the programme, Mega versus MAGA. We'll speak to the group of manufacturers in Northern Ireland trying not to lose out now that Donald Trump's back in the White House. And with me to offer his insight and analysis on all of that and more, the editor of the Press Association in Ireland, David Young. It's not about the money, it's about workload and the conditions teachers are expected to operate under. That's why they say they've turned down a 5.5% pay increase. From tomorrow, they say they'll take industrial action short of striking. Here's our education correspondent, Robbie Meredith.
It's not that pupils at Bridge Integrated Primary in Banbridge will have noticed any difference, but for teachers, the pay deal just didn't add up. And it's the increasing demands they face and not money that were crucial.
For many, many years, teachers have, and schools and education in general has existed in goodwill.
Quite often I'm taking work home, sitting at the kitchen table, whether it be marking or planning or revising plans or filling in certain forms. I quite often spend most of my time in the kitchen rather than spending time with family. And I do it because I'm professional, because I want to give the children in my care the best.
Realistically, most teachers will do a minimum of 10 hours overtime a week. So when you total that up over 40 weeks, that's 400 hours of overtime, which is unpaid, and no one else in any other job is expected to do that.
Action short of strike is due to start in many schools from Monday. It'll affect things like parents' meetings, inspections and some other school activities. In a letter sent to teachers, the teaching employers said that action short of strike would have a corrosive and long-term impact on pupils in schools, and that by taking part in it, teachers will not be meeting their full contractual obligations. That letter didn't go down well with many teachers. It did, though, acknowledge that there were concerns over their workload. Teresa says that teachers are being asked to take on more and more responsibility beyond the classroom to help pupils, and something has to give.
We might be counsellors, we could be social workers, we could be doctors, we could be nurses, we could be physiotherapists, we could be OTs. We have all of these different hats that we have to wear all the time. And add to that your main job, which is teaching. And I think people don't understand this is why workload has become such an issue.
And it's an issue that will not be easy to solve.
Robbie Meredith reporting. Well, I'm joined now by the DUP MLA Peter Martin, who's a member of Stormont's Education Committee, the Alliance MLA Nick Matheson, who chairs the committee, and Jackie White from the Ulster Teachers Union. We did ask the Education Minister Paul Givan to come onto the programme, but we were told he was unavailable. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Jackie White, first of all, looks like a bit of a mess, this, doesn't it? Your union recommended to members that they accept this deal, but they voted against it. You suggest that there was misinformation on social media which led to that situation. What precisely went wrong?
I think we've moved beyond that now, moved beyond the misinformation. We acknowledged it was there, but we've moved beyond that. We recommended that the pay deal be accepted, having expressed concerns about the other elements that were contained within the deal. We were looking for actually just a pay offer, and the teachers would either accept or reject. We are now in a position where we don't know the basis on which the teachers have actually chosen not to. That's why we're saying we're not rejecting. We're saying we're not in a position to accept at this time, because we don't know the basis for the decision making on the part of the teachers, because there were a raft of other things, and what we're hearing is that the workload element, the further commitments to addressing workload, and the fact that those commitments which were made in 2020 and last year and yet again, the system has lost the trust of the teachers. So
your members were spooked then by the terms of the deal. Is that it, effectively?
Not really that they were spooked. They couldn't. First of all, their contract was restated, and there was information about industrial stability, And it wasn't as much spooked. They understood all of that and they didn't really know what the point was of putting that in the first place. And therefore, was there some kind of message that perhaps they were being accused of not fulfilling their contract?
But they were very clear. We heard from 3 teachers in that report from Robbie Meredith who were absolutely crystal clear about what they do over and above what they ought to be doing. So presumably that's the logic behind the decision that so many of your members took to reject this particular deal. But it puts you at odds with your members. You're sitting here today and you can't actually tell me exactly why the deal was rejected. And can you tell me what happens next?
Why I can't tell you why the deal was rejected. And yet now we are starting to get the sense of that. And the workload is a huge issue. And we've always known that the workload is a huge issue. But the fact was that the timing of the deal, the way that the deal fell, came out on a Friday night and so on, we have not yet had the opportunity to engage with members. Now, I was in touch with members yesterday or on Friday, and I have told them that we have organised now a programme of engagement to really drill down. But the initial feedback coming back is to do with the lack of trust in terms of the addressing of the workload. And we have been at this since 2020. We have been making these points since 2020. And the teachers are quite clearly and quite properly telling us they have not seen any fundamental change or any change of any sort in the classroom.
Do you accept, just very quickly before we move on to hear from our other guests, that the unions have a hand to play in this shambles? Because that's what it looks like. Have you handled it badly?
No, I don't feel we have handled it badly. We actually got the best that we could get out of the negotiations in terms of trying to get a pay deal over the line, trying to get a pay offer. At the end up, we had no choice as to whether these other elements were put in. We had to move forward with it because the money was on the table, and we thought, well, at least it would be a step forward to get the money over the line. But look, we are completely behind our members in terms of the workload issues. We have been making this point for years, and I can understand completely why they don't have any trust in this. OK, let's bring in Nick Matheson, who chairs the Education Committee up at Stormont. Is it a mess?
It is a mess, and it's very regrettable that we have arrived in this position, because I think it seems clear everybody was going to be content with pay parity if that was delivered, that would have been acceptable. Workload appears to be the issue here. It's not for me to comment on the internal union processes of whether they have communicated appropriately with their members. What I would say, I think the language being used from the management side, which I think is coming from the minister on a departmental level, from a policy perspective, that language around commitments to industrial harmony and restating teachers' contractual obligations when they're already well aware of them. I think that has been a massive part of this, and it has led to teachers feeling, we feel that we're being pushed into something here. We're making commitments that don't seem clear, and I think that it would be helpful if everybody's language could soften, and I would urge everyone to get back around the table, because from the minister's perspective, he seems to be saying there'll be no engagement until the action is called off. I think we need to move beyond sort of drawing those hard lines in the sand, get back around the table and resolve this, because it's in everybody's interest to do so.
Do you believe that responsibility for this standoff rests with the department, rests specifically with the minister? Where would you place it?
I mean, I think it is... It is very clear from the statements that the minister has now put out into the public domain that he has a very clear view around this deal does have to have strings attached. And I think that is the bit that is entirely unhelpful. Teachers simply want to know, are we going to be paid fairly? And are all those previous commitments around workload going to be dealt with? I don't think we need any extra layers of commitment around periods of industrial harmony, adding additional strings attached to the deal. I think this needs to simply be done cleanly, clearly and simply. And if we're in a scenario where the minister has decided that he wants to play hardball and make a clear statement around what he does or doesn't think is appropriate for teachers to do in terms of industrial action, I think that is profoundly unhelpful. I also think that the comments that there will be no engagement until the action is called off have not gone down well. I think we only resolve these things when we talk about them, so let's get back around the table and get this sorted, because I think on the broad issues, everyone's agreed.
Peter Martin, the minister is, of course, a member of your party. You're a former special advisor to a previous DUP, two previous DUP education ministers, I think I'm right in saying. Mm-hmm. Do you take the advice given by Nick Matheson there, which basically says the minister, your minister, needs to sit down and engage with those who have been alarmed by some of the add-ons that were in this pay deal and get the matter resolved as soon as possible?
Well, Mark, I mean, let's take it back a year. Whenever Stormont was reconfigured, the Minister came in, said that pay for teachers was a key priority, and it was. He managed to secure 24% pay rise for the starting salary, bringing it up to 30,000, and then reflect 10% pay rise for the last 3 years. And I agree with that. I think our teachers were underpaid. I think they are an incredibly valuable profession. They educate our children. How important is that? So that's where we were. Where we are now is that the Minister did bid for this additional money, keeping pay as a priority for teachers, managed to achieve 5.5%, and that is an equivalent with England and Wales in terms of salary levels.
But then he added these other bits and pieces on. He played hardball, to quote Nick Matheson, and instead of the teachers accepting the deal, the teachers have walked away from the deal. Is he the author of his own misfortune?
No, I don't believe he is. And the workload issues that have been mentioned by both Nick and Jackie are really important. I spoke to teachers last week and they highlighted workload issues to me. They said it was difficult and in some cases challenging in terms of the position that they were in. But my understanding is that there's a commitment to working through these issues, and that was clearly part of the deal. But as well as that, we do need stability in the sector. It's important that teachers are valued and paid well for the work that they do.
Yeah, but hang on, listen, just to pick up, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
I
okay.
mean, Nick just made the point there that the Minister has said he's not prepared to sit down and engage to try to resolve the issue unless he gets an assurance that this action will not proceed. Surely that kind of position is unacceptable under the circumstances, certainly unhelpful under the circumstances. What he needs to do is he needs to sit down and have the conversation.
I think in the first point, Mark, I think the unions, and maybe Jackie would accept this, I mean, they need to negotiate and have conversations with their members. As far as I understand, the heads of the unions recommended that this be accepted and the members didn't. I think in the first instance, Mark, probably, and Jackie reflected this, is there needs to be a conversation between union leadership and membership to drill down to what the issues are and then come back to management side.
Yeah, and the Minister needs to make a commitment publicly, doesn't he, that he's prepared to have a conversation to try to resolve the issue, rather than say, I'm not talking to anybody until you accept my terms and conditions. That's not helpful.
Well, I think in the first point, Mark, I think the unions, and in fact, Jackie said this, the unions need to have a conversation with their membership, find out what the issues are. There's no point in this widening conversation if we don't actually know what the issues are that the members have. That's the responsibility of the unions. I'm sure they'll do that. And then to have a conversation with management side.
Is that a reasonable approach, Nick Matheson?
I mean, I think I would say two things. I think, first of all, I'm very conscious that we have a minister who's very happy to take credit when a pay deal is delivered, but when it's not, it's suddenly nothing to do with him. I think he does need to take some ownership of that, and if the language in the pay deal has been unhelpful, that needs to be addressed. From what I'm hearing from teachers, the issues are clear. It is about workload, and it's really around delivering on previous commitments. Some of these agreements around workload reviews go back to 2020. We're 5 years on, so I think if we can actually clearly set out clear timeframes for addressing the workload issues, I would be hopeful this can be resolved. Okay. The best way to avoid action short of strike is dealing with the issues that are driving it.
So can that be done, do you think, Jackie? Just briefly, are you prepared to sit down, talk to your members ASAP to ascertain exactly what the issues are, what it is relating to workload commitments that they have reservations about, and then hopefully get into talks with the Department and the Minister as soon as possible to resolve this?
Absolutely. As I've already said, we have been in contact with members to just plan.
How quickly do you think you can do that?
We can do that as soon as we're hoping that our members will enjoy some downtime over the half term.
Okay. But
as soon as they come back after half term, we would have that planned. But we feel that, yes, the Minister states that he values the workforce. Yes, that he states he values teachers. But our teachers now have to see that by a fundamental change and some delivery on commitment to workload. OK,
well, we look forward to seeing what the next move is. Thanks very much for now to you, Jackie. There is one other issue I need to talk to the two politicians about very quickly. We touched on this subject on last week's Sunday Politics, but I mean, another story in which the Education Minister's come under fire is the decision to fund a new football pitch at Lisneal College in Londonderry. Nick Matheson, at the Education Committee this week, you accused the Minister, Paul Givan, of undue influence over that decision, something he denied. Are you going to take this matter further if you can?
To be clear, I didn't accuse him of undue influence. I asked him if he had exerted influence on the process. So that was the issue that I was seeking to establish clarity on. For me, this issue...
Are you now persuaded then, having asked that question, that he didn't exercise undue influence on the decision?
We can only take the Minister at his word, and he has put that onto the record that he states he did not.
Do you accept that?
Well, I mean, I have to take him at his word. I've no reason
to... Well, you don't have to take him at his word.
Well, I mean, I would hope very much that he hasn't lied to committee. So on that basis, I feel it is appropriate to take him at his word.
So that's the matter over and done with then, is it?
No, it is absolutely not, and that was the point I was going to make. I think it's regrettable, actually, that an individual school has been drawn into an issue around funding. That for me, the picture is now about the wider funding of minor capital works in our schools. It has really come to light that there is seemingly very little openness, transparency, clarity about how those projects are identified and how they're prioritised. When resources are so scarce, we need confidence in that system, and that, for me, is what the Education Committee needs to be looking at, and I would call for a full review of how those projects are funded. OK, Peter Martin, as I said in the introduction, you sit on that committee, and you will know that at the committee hearing, Mr Given was accused of cronyism by the Sinn Féin MLA Pat Sheehan. He, of course, denied that. He did meet with the school's headmaster and his fellow DUP Minister Gordon Lyons last June. Only 2 schools in Derry that applied for major funding over the last decade were successful, and they both had their funding paused. Yet Lisneal gets £700,000 for a football pitch that it didn't formally ask for. What's going on?
So I agree it's very unfortunate that this issue has been politicised. Mark, you referenced the Education Committee. We had the Minister there for 2 hours last week. The first hour and a half of that was dominated by this one issue. In fact, it took to half an hour to go before special educational needs, educational underachievement was even raised. And I personally think that's shameful in terms of how the committee prioritises issues.
Well, if members have reservations, it's reasonable to ask about them, is it not?
It certainly is.
You don't think this looks at all fishy?
Oh, well, I would say if we have the Minister there for 2 hours, spending an hour and a half on this issue, rather than dealing with the serious issues that we have in our education system, like SEN reform, like capital, like teachers' pay, like educational achievement, like holiday hunger, those are critical issues for me and really important issues.
But £700,000 of public money and how it is spent, and the question which members have about whether or not there was favouritism shown to one school for a project that it didn't ask for, is surely at least a reasonable question to place before the Minister.
I agree, it's a reasonable question. My question back to you is an hour and a half of the committee's time useful? My understanding of this issue, Mark, is that other sectors in Foyle actually have had £7.5 million worth of minor capital works across the board. And yet this one control school is the one that's being targeted and politicised. And I think that's really, really poor. OK, look, we're out of time. I wish we had more time to talk about it. I suspect it is something that we will indeed return to. But for now, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Let's have a first word with my guest of the day, the editor of PA Ireland, David Young, who's been listening to that. Just to go back to the issue about public sector pay and whether teachers were right to reject this deal, and whether you can understand the confusion. Where are you, having heard what you've heard over the last 10 minutes?
Well, it certainly does appear to be wider than the pay issue. It's coming down from the feedback we've heard from teachers to the workload point, which is obviously systemic. More than it can't be, resolved with increasing percentage pay here and there. So that's the problem for the Minister, that addressing that workload issue, the work still needs to be done. The functions that schools carry out and the services that they provide still need to be done. So it's how you manage to do that with the staffing envelope you have. And I think all this comes back to is the pressure that all public services are under in regard to the financial envelope. What it does do is place the Education Minister in a slightly uncomfortable position, in an awkward position, because by comparison you see the pay issue with the health service looks like it's resolved. They avoided strike action pre-Christmas. The civil service, that looks like it's moving forward in regard to that 9% they've been offered. So if you have those two ministers and departments that have successfully potentially navigated those public pay sector disputes, but you have the Education Minister with that still lingering on, that becomes an issue for him.
Just briefly, look, it's maybe not been the easiest week that Paul Given, as Minister, has had at the office. His colleague says it's perfectly reasonable that the issue of Lisneal College should be raised in the committee. He's not happy with the weight that it was given, but there are clearly politicians at that table who feel that it is a big issue and serious questions need to be asked, and serious answers need to be given to them. That is an issue that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
No, I mean, the issue, listen, Neil, there are a lot more questions, I think. Politicians certainly have a lot more questions about it, and I think that those will have to come out in the days and weeks ahead. I think the wider issue, it does, this whole issue in regard to public sector pay, it speaks to the cyclical nature of our politics at the moment, and that comes down to the fact that the one-year budgets are becoming a real problem, because no sooner will we have these public sector pay disputes resolved, if they are resolved, we'll be back into another cycle of the next time. So I think it speaks to the need for Stormont politicians to get longer term multi-year budgets.
OK. David, for now, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again a little bit later in the programme. Donald Trump stormed back into the White House with his promise of making America great again, but his proposed tariffs on foreign imports could have wide-ranging implications for many businesses on this side of the Atlantic, and some on the island of Ireland are amongst the most concerned. The group in question is called MEGA, and its members are worried about what MAGA might mean for them. Stephen Kelly is part of the organisation, and he joins me now from our Foyle studio. Welcome to you. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. Just explain, first of all, how Donald Trump and his tariffs might impact on the businesses you're representing today.
So Donald Trump seems to be unfolding quick-fire policy decisions and sometimes quick-fire reversals as well, but specifically in and around this tariff issue. Tariffs are applied to goods. They are paid for by the people who import, so the people in the United States. And it means that in order to protect US production, that he's trying to make it much more expensive for people to send goods to the United States. And when you kind of relate that to a local level, there are some concerns. Obviously, lots of the investors here from the United States don't sell physical things. They provide services, so they're okay. We have some manufacturers here in Northern Ireland who invest heavily in the United States. There's production premises across the US. And we have some US investors who have arrived here since the Good Friday Agreement who are actually selling American goods to Europe, to the UK and to the rest of the world. But what's left there is a small group of largely local manufacturers who are making stuff that the American consumer and businesses need. And the risk that the US administration may apply a tariff to those people is obviously of great concern.
And Stephen, as I understand it, you're meeting the US Consul General here, James Applegate, next week. At his request, I think. What will you be telling him?
We'll be explaining the importance of our manufacturing community, particularly in that Mid-Ulster area where it's the strongest part of the Northern Ireland economy. It's responsible for thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment that comes into Northern Ireland. Those jobs, those businesses are critically important to those communities and indeed to the Northern Ireland economy. So we want to make sure that the United States are fully aware of the investments that they have here, the importance that Northern Ireland plays for US corporates to sell into these marketplaces, but also the importance of those locally founded manufacturing businesses who do need the United States as a market.
It's very complicated, of course, isn't it? I mean, just to ratchet this up another level, because some of the companies operating in Mid-Ulster are US-owned, and some of them are local companies, which in turn have plants and employees in the United States. So there would be, I mean, depending on what happens in terms of the decision-making process in Washington, there could be different consequences for different companies at different times. That's something which you need to convey as well, and which there must be particular concern about on the ground.
There is. There's no doubt about that. The United States is a really important market for Northern Ireland, and particularly for our engineering sector, but also for pharmaceuticals, for aerospace and others. The US is a very good friend of Northern Ireland. We would hope that Northern Ireland would be considered. The likelihood of that is minimal. We accept that. But it's important that people are communicating, that they really understand the impact that this would have. The United States has been really critical to not just our peace, but also our prosperity, and we need to make sure that that continues.
And I mean, I'm sorry to be a merchant of doom and gloom, but just to get some sense of this, I mean, if this does go badly and if it falls the way you wouldn't want it to fall in terms of that decision-making process stateside, what could that mean, particularly in terms of employment for people west of the Bann?
Well, our manufacturing community is spread right across Northern Ireland, but it's particularly strong west of the Bann, particularly strong in that Mid-Ulster area. These are international businesses that have a real Northern Ireland accent to them. They really need that US trade in order to be successful. If that trade is closed off to them, or if it becomes too expensive, or there's a protectionist policy put in place that doesn't allow their goods to travel, then that undoubtedly has some jeopardy for those businesses involved.
OK, Stephen, got to leave it there. We'll continue to watch with interest. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. And the topic of tariffs and the impact they may have here and in the Republic was discussed in depth on our most recent Red Lines podcast, which is still available on BBC Sounds. Now let's have a final word with David Young, who's been listening to that. Donald Trump's influence is far-reaching. It's also important. It's understandable, isn't it, that these companies will want to protect their interests. But, you know, as Stephen has said, there could be implications for real people living and working in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and it's a very, very complicated situation because it could actually, in some ways, and some people have said this, that it may actually end up being an advantage for companies in Northern Ireland, especially if Trump targets the EU to the degree to which he's warned, and potentially maybe doesn't target the UK because the trade deficit with the UK and the US isn't that much of an issue. So if we work out in that situation and the UK isn't hit with tariffs, then certainly from an exporter's point of view, then it could be a competitive advantage for the companies based in Northern Ireland. Now then, you have the issue with importers, and then that's where the Windsor Framework and the Brexit situation and that comes into play, and that intersection with that and the tariffs, because then you have the added complication of Northern Ireland companies, and if an EU tariff is applied trying to bring goods into Northern Ireland, they will have to then pay customs on those products from the US. They will then be subject to a rebate, and they can get a rebate back. But it speaks to the cash flow issues they may experience if those tariffs materialise. I suppose the real issue is whether, and we've seen this during the week, is Trump wedded to these tariffs, or is he using the threat of tariffs to get other things and as leverage to get other concessions? And I suppose it's only when that really, makes its journey through, and whether maybe potentially Trump is trying to get concessions in terms of regulation of social media companies in terms of the EU, and the tariffs actually may not materialise.
There is one other story just finally from the end of the week that we need to talk about, and that was the coroner's judgment that the SAS killing of 4 IRA men in Clonaux in 1992 was unjustified. The political reaction has been largely along expected lines, but the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, who is from the area, of course, has been quiet on the matter.
She has. I don't think there's any surprise in that, because if we go back to last month, late last year, there was a similar inquest, Francis Bradley's death, where the coroner actually found that the forces were justified in using lethal force, and again it was Cathal Mulligan left to do that. And I think that's a deliberate decision on the behalf of Sinn Féin to give that space and to give some distance from her office as First Minister to maybe not step into issues that are seen to be so contentious.
OK, got to leave it there. David, thank you. As ever, that is all we've got time for today. There'll be no Viewer Sunday Politics next week because of the half-term holidays, but we will have a new Red Lines podcast dropping this Wednesday afternoon. You'll find that on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good day.